Oops, I started painting before I turned my camera on. So I've put a little bit down here. I'll be moving back and forth between my brush that has the darker colors on it and the brush that has the lighter colors. This is just going to be roughly applied around the edge of the little calf. And then I will get a bigger, stiffer brush and go in and finish the application and work the edges where I need to. I'm letting the paint pick up from the colors below it just to purposely blend it. And I'll also let some of these little dark specks show through because it just gives some variation to the background. By dipping into some of that burnt sienna, it just kind of keeps the edge here from being too sharp. Repeats the color of the calf. Ties the background in a little bit to the painting. Okay, I'm just going to switch to a bristle brush now. I'll just use the same brush that I did with my block in. And scrub in the paint here and there wherever I think it might go. All this can be changed quite easily if I don't like the look of it. At this point, I'm just dipping into my palette the colors I've got already, and that will unify the painting a little bit. I think I'm going to play with a little bit of palette knife work in here. Let's see if I can grab my knife without... Let's see if I can grab my knife without making too much noise and kerfuffle. That's the wrong knife. Yeah, I like just a little bit of variation that gives. And that's too much because I got myself into the white with it. Just mixing up a little bit more color because I've run myself out of paint. And when you're doing something like this, having to remix a color is not a bad thing because you end up with some variation. Go a little lighter with it. also fighting with this knob on my easel here. It's getting in my way. And if I find that it's too mottled looking, that's easy to fix either with a brush or by scraping the knife across a little bit more. It's getting a little hard to work in here with my painting and the knobs in here, so I'm just going to use a brush. And now for some final work on making some areas really stand out. Again, it's important to dip into my linseed oil because the paint will not float across. It'll just muddle in unless I've got some linseed oil in it. So one of the final steps is going to be to get all the edges exactly where I want them. Easy to move the paint back and forth. I'm going to put a little bit of a highlight along that edge there. So that's why I like to work with wet paint, because you really can use the properties of the oil, the fact that it stays wet, to get a really sharp edge if you want it, or a softer edge. Let's just do something in there. The shadow areas of the white are really kind of a cool blue. You can see it on the brush. Kind of a muted color. And the white areas, the real highlighted areas, have just a touch of yellow in the paint. Make sure that I've got a clean spot of linseed oil. lots of going back to the paint because it picks up the black from the surrounding area, and it would just muddy up my paint if I didn't go back to the palette regularly. It is way easier to get tiny little lines like this if the paint is wet than if you had just dry paint on dry canvas. I kind of like the way the little wisps on the top of his head stick out, so I'm emphasizing those quite a bit. Being careful to keep them going in different directions because you don't want them to look like little fence posts. I can see here that my paint is drying underneath, and that's why it's not sliding across. The brown paint dries really quickly, so I'm going to remedy that by bringing it back into the white here with another layer of paint. That's better. And of course one could fiddle away here all day, but the painting is basically done. I will let it dry before I sign it because I've got kind of gobby paint here, so it's easier to sign once it's dry. On the other hand, sometimes it's easier to sign once it's wet, so I will think about it, because if I sign it right here, then if the signature isn't showing up really nicely or isn't sharp enough, I can easily come back in with the background paint. On this tiny little painting, that might be the easiest route. Move the camera and give you a straight-on look at him. As I mentioned, it's done with water-soluble oils, and this I'm using the Cobra brand, and this canvas is 6 inches by 8 inches. It's a linen canvas mounted on board.